Hampton County 911, where's your emergency?
This is Alex Murdaugh at 4147 Moselle Road. I need the police to ambulance immediately. My wife and child just shot badly.
A powerful family that ran a courthouse for nearly a century. A wife and a son found down by the dog kennels of a 1,700-acre estate, and a father who called it in himself. For almost 2 years, the case sat unsolved. No arrest, no charge. Just a name that kept surfacing every time investigators looked for who had the most to lose. Then, in 2023, a jury delivered a verdict the whole country was watching for, and in 2026, that verdict was thrown out. This is the Murdaugh case. I am not going to tell you who did this. I am going to walk you through exactly what the evidence says, what a jury decided, and why. Right now, tonight, the legal question of guilt is officially unresolved again. To understand this case, you have to understand the name first. For 86 years, 3 generations of Murdaugh men held the same job, solicitor of South Carolina's 14th Circuit. That is the elected chief prosecutor for 5 counties in the Lowcountry, the stretch of rural South Carolina between Charleston and Savannah. Randolph Murdaugh I held it, then his son, then his grandson, Randolph Murdaugh III. The family's law firm, built on personal injury cases, grew alongside that political power. In a region where the Murdaugh name sat on the courthouse, the sheriff's office, and half the local law firms, that combination of prosecutorial control and civil litigation wealth is the backdrop against which everything else in this case happened. Richard Alexander Murdaugh, Alex, was the 4th generation. He did not hold the solicitor title himself. That role, by the time of this case, belonged to Duffie Stone, a lawyer with deep personal ties to the family who had succeeded Alex's father upon his retirement in 2006. Alex instead worked as a partner at the family firm, then called Peters, Murdaugh, Parker, Elsroth, and Detrick, PMPED for short, building a reputation as a skilled personal injury attorney with deep local influence and volunteering part-time in Stone's solicitor's office. He married Margaret Maggie Brandstetter in the early 1990s. They raised 2 sons, Richard Alexander Murdaugh III, known as Buster, and Paul Terry Murdaugh the Younger. On paper, they were Lowcountry royalty, a hunting lodge called Moselle, spanning roughly 1,700 acres across Colleton and Hampton counties, a beach house, a fishing boat, private schools. Underneath that surface, a different picture was already forming, one this investigation would spend years digging out. But before any of the events at the center of this case, there was a boat. The group set out on the evening of February 23, 2019. In the early hours of the following morning, 19-year-old Paul Murdaugh, driving his family's boat with 5 friends aboard, was headed back along the South Carolina coast. Records show he had used his older brother Buster's identification to buy alcohol earlier that evening at a convenience store. Paul's blood alcohol level was later measured at roughly 3 times the legal limit. Driving the boat back toward Beaufort, Paul crashed into the pilings of the Archers Creek Bridge. Several passengers were thrown or injured. One of them, 19-year-old Mallory Beach, went into the water and did not make it out. Her body was recovered 8 days later, roughly 5 miles from the crash site. Paul was charged with 3 felony counts of boating under the influence. The local prosecutor recused himself, citing the family's ties to the office his relatives had run for decades. The Beach family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Murdaughs, which would eventually settle for more than $15 million from multiple defendants. Attorney Mark Tinsley, who represented the Beach family, later testified that Alex confronted him at a bar and pressured him to back off the case. Tinsley also testified that the family received preferential treatment at the crash scene itself. The Beach family kept at a distance while their daughter's body was still unrecovered. The Beach case would not go to trial before this story took its next turn. It became, in the prosecution's later telling, the first domino, the event that started pulling back the curtain on the Murdaugh family's finances and behavior at the exact moment Alex could least afford scrutiny. By June of 2021, Paul was 22 and still awaiting trial in the Beach case. A hearing in the family's civil wrongful death lawsuit had been scheduled for June 10th, 3 days after the night I'm about to walk you through. A hearing, prosecutors would later argue, was set to expose Alex's finances in open court. On the evening of June 7th, phone and Snapchat records placed Paul at the dog kennels on the Moselle property. At 7:56 p.m., he sent a Snapchat video to a friend. At 8:40, he was on a 4-minute call with another friend, Rogan Gibson, discussing an issue with a dog. Cell phone video recovered from Paul's phone, later shown to jurors, captured Alex's voice at the kennels around this time, a piece of evidence that would become central to the case because Alex's own account placed him elsewhere. Just after 10 p.m., Alex called 911. On the recording, his voice is frantic. He tells the dispatcher he has just arrived home to find his wife and son shot. Asked whether his son was moving, he responds that neither of them is moving. Colleton County Sheriff Sergeant Daniel Green was first on scene, and his body camera captured the moments after his arrival, Alex waiting near the bodies by the kennels. Within the first minute of speaking with Green, Alex began talking about the boat case and about threats he believed Paul had received connected to it, raising that possibility himself before investigators had asked.
This is a long story. My son was in a boat wreck a few months back. He's been getting threats. Most of it's been benign stuff we didn't take serious.
Okay.
He's been getting punched. I know that's what it is.
Coroner Richard Harvey would later confirm both victims had been shot multiple times. Paul was found in the feed room of the kennel building, shot twice with a shotgun. Maggie was found a short distance away near a parked all-terrain vehicle, shot several times with a rifle consistent with an AR-15 style platform. Investigators would ultimately conclude, based on shell casings recovered at the scene, that the weapons involved were consistent with firearms the Murdaugh family itself owned, though the murder weapons were never recovered. Alex's account was that he had been at his mother's house that evening, checking on her amid her declining health from Alzheimer's, and had returned home later to find the bodies. Investigators would spend the next 19 months testing that account against phone data, vehicle telemetry, and witness statements. 3 days after the killings, Randolph Murdaugh III, Alex's father and the family's last solicitor, passed away at 81 after a long illness. His death was unrelated to the shootings, but it meant the family lost 3 members in the span of a single week. In those same early days, Alex named the family's longtime groundskeeper, C.B. Rowe, as someone he suspected. Investigators checked Rowe's phone location data and found it placed him nowhere near Moselle at the time of the shootings, clearing him. Alex offered a $100,000 reward for information. No arrest followed. For months, the case was publicly framed as unsolved, a double homicide with no named suspect, even as investigators were quietly building a financial case against Alex on an entirely separate track. That separate track started with a name jurors would hear again and again, Gloria Satterfield. Gloria Satterfield worked for the Murdaugh family as a housekeeper and nanny for more than 20 years. In February 2018, she died of injuries sustained in a fall at the Murdaugh home. Alex told her sons he would represent them in a claim against his own homeowner's insurance to secure compensation. He recommended they hire his close friend and former college roommate, attorney Cory Fleming. The insurance claims paid out roughly $4 million combined, a $505,000 policy and a separate $3.8 million payment. Satterfield's sons received none of it. Prosecutors later established that Alex had set up a bank account years earlier, in September 2015, under the name Forge, designed to resemble Forge Consulting, a legitimate structured settlement firm his clients had genuinely used before. He was the account's sole owner. When settlement checks came in for real clients, they were made payable to Forge, and the money went into Alex's personal account instead of the people he represented. Fleming later pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud for his role in the Satterfield scheme. Alex's attorneys additionally revealed in a related civil filing that he had fabricated the account of how Satterfield fell, inventing a story that dogs had caused it, specifically to support the insurance claim. This was not an isolated theft. When state and federal prosecutors finished accounting for it, they had identified more than 100 separate financial crimes spanning more than a decade, with roughly 18 known victims and losses in the range of $10 million. Vulnerable clients, including minors and people injured in car crashes, whose settlement money Alex diverted through the fake Forge account and other schemes, sometimes with the help of Palmetto State Bank executive Russell Laffitte, who was separately convicted on 6 counts of federal fraud. This decade of theft, in the state's telling, is the key to motive. By June of 2021, Alex had been confronted by his law partners about missing money. He was days away from a deposition in the Beach wrongful death case that his own colleagues believed would expose his finances in open court. His best friend and fellow attorney, Chris Wilson, testified that he had begun to realize Alex had been misappropriating client money for years. The state's theory, laid out by lead prosecutor Creighton Waters, was direct. Alex was about to be caught, publicly and financially ruined, and the killings were committed to generate sympathy and delay that exposure. The timing, a decade-long fraud on the verge of collapse, 3 days before a deposition, is the foundation the state's entire case was built on. 3 months after the killings, on Labor Day weekend, Alex was found on the side of a rural Hampton County road with a gunshot wound to the head. He initially told investigators he had stopped to change a tire and was ambushed by a stranger in a passing truck. He was hospitalized with what his attorney described as a fractured skull, though the wound turned out to be a graze. That story collapsed within days. In a recorded interview from a rehabilitation facility, Alex admitted he had arranged the shooting himself. He said he had asked a distant cousin, Curtis Edward Smith, known locally as Cousin Eddie, to shoot him so that his surviving son, Buster, could collect on a $10 million life insurance policy that Alex believed would not pay out for a suicide, but would pay out for a homicide staged to look random. By his own account, the plan misfired. Literally, Smith's shot only grazed him. Both men were charged, Smith with assisted suicide, insurance fraud, and related counts. Alex separately faced charges tied to the scheme. In that same interview, Alex resigned from his family's law firm and disclosed a 20-year opioid addiction, checking into rehabilitation the following day. At trial, the state pointed to this episode as evidence of a broader pattern, a man who, whenever cornered, lied first and cast himself as the victim. The trial judge limited how much of the incident jurors could hear, ruling parts of it too removed from the murder charges themselves, though the roadside shooting and Alex's own recorded admission about it were presented to the jury. One more name entered this case during the investigation, and it remains unresolved to this day. Stephen Smith, a 19-year-old, was found gone on a rural Hampton County road in 2015, in a case that had been ruled a hit and run and never solved. In June 2021, the same month as the killings at Moselle, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, known as SLED, publicly confirmed it had reopened the Stephen Smith case, citing information gathered during the Murdaugh double murder investigation. However, no charges have been filed in the Stephen Smith case. No one has been named a suspect in a courtroom. The connection reported by investigators is that information surfacing during the Moselle investigation prompted them to take a second look at his death. Beyond that, it remains an open, unsolved case, and I'm not going to speculate further than the record supports. Alex was arrested on the financial charges in October 2021, months before any murder charge. Over the following year, state and federal grand juries issued a cascade of new indictments, 21 charges in December 2021, 23 more in January 2022, 4 more in March alongside 18 new charges against Cory Fleming, 20 charges against Russell Laffitte in May, and additional drug and financial charges against Alex and Curtis Smith in June. It was not until July 14, 2022, more than a year after the killings, that a Colleton County grand jury indicted Alex on 2 counts of murder and 2 related weapons charges. He pleaded not guilty and denied any involvement in his wife and son's deaths, a position he has maintained consistently since. The trial opened in Walterboro, South Carolina in late January 2023 before Circuit Judge Clifton Newman. It ran roughly 6 weeks. Jurors were buzzed out to walk the Moselle property itself, the dog kennels, the feed room, the outbuildings where the shootings occurred, to understand the physical layout prosecutors were describing. The prosecution's case rested on 3 pillars. First, digital evidence. The cell phone video from Paul's phone that placed Alex's voice at the kennels around 8:44 p.m., directly contradicting Alex's account that he was elsewhere and hadn't been to the kennels that evening until he found the bodies. 2 witnesses, Paul's friends Rogan Gibson and Will Loving, identified Alex's voice on that recording during their testimony. GPS and vehicle data from Alex's car were used to corroborate his movements against that timeline.
Get back! Get back!
Hey, he's got a bird in his mouth.
Bubba.
Hey, Bubba.
It's a guinea.
This is a chicken.
Come here, Bubba.
Come here, Cash.
Come here, Bubba.
Cash. Quit.
Second, financial motive, the Satterfield fraud, the forge account, Chris Wilson's testimony about realizing his friend had been stealing, and the looming deposition in the Beach case that prosecutors argued was about to expose everything. Third, consciousness of guilt, the roadside shooting confession and testimony from investigators and witnesses that Alex did not appear to display the reactions they'd expect from someone discovering his family members that way. Testimony painting him as composed rather than visibly shaken when officers first encountered him. The defense, led by attorneys Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin, argued Alex was a grieving husband and father caught in a badly handled investigation, with the real perpetrators never identified. They pointed to Alex's decades of community standing and challenged the reliability of the voice identification and the state's timeline. Alex testified in his own defense, a significant risk in any murder trial. On the stand, he admitted to lying to investigators repeatedly in the initial days of the case, including denying he'd been at the kennels that evening, but he denied killing his wife and son. He testified his paranoia and dishonesty stemmed from his opioid addiction and from panic over his unraveling financial crimes, not from guilt over the killings themselves. On March 2nd, 2023, after deliberating for under 3 hours, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all 4 counts, 2 murder charges, and 2 counts of possession of a weapon during commission of a violent crime. The next day, Judge Newman sentenced Alex to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole.
Mr. Murdaugh, I sentence you to the State Department of Corrections on each of the murder indictments in the murder of your wife, Maggie Murdaugh. I sentence you for the term of the rest of your natural life for the murder of Paul Murdaugh, whom you probably love so much. I sentence you to prison for murdering him for the rest of your natural life. Those sentences will run consecutive. Under the statute involving possession of a weapon during a violent crime, there is no sentence where a life sentence is imposed on other indictments. That is the sentence of the court, and you are remanded to the State Department of Corrections.
With the murder case resolved by verdict, the financial prosecutions move forward on their own track. In November 2023, Alex pleaded guilty in state court to 22 financial crimes, out of roughly 100 originally charged, including breach of trust, money laundering, forgery, and tax evasion. Judge Newman sentenced him to 27 years, a term prosecutors described publicly as an insurance policy, a sentence designed to keep Alex in prison even if the murder conviction were ever overturned on appeal. At that sentencing, victims spoke directly to him. Tony Satterfield, Gloria's son, confronted him over the years of dishonesty and betrayal. Then, in the same breath, told him he forgave him. In April 2024, a federal judge sentenced Alex to an additional 40 years on 22 federal counts, including wire fraud, bank fraud, and money laundering, to run concurrently with his state sentences.
All those wildlife hunts I had for law enforcement, your entire family was the guest of honor. Mr. Buster, Judge Eldroff, insisted on me taking care of them for the day. You don't know how many brownie points you got in my life from just that. I trusted you with everything. I knew I was gonna break. I knew.
Federal prosecutors said Alex had failed a polygraph test tied to the plea agreement and had identified 11 additional victims and over $1 million in previously unaccounted stolen funds. He was ordered to pay more than $8 million in restitution. Addressing the judge directly, he expressed deep remorse for the harm he had caused the people who had once trusted him. You asked whether there were signs that could have helped Maggie avoid what happened to her. I want to answer that as a detective would, using only what the record actually supports, not speculation dressed up as insight. What the evidence does show is a household under enormous escalating pressure in the years and months before June 2021. Alex was managing an opioid dependency he later said had lasted 20 years, spending, by his own account, extraordinary sums to sustain it. He was actively stealing from clients and colleagues to cover it, a scheme that had been running for roughly a decade by the time of the killings. His law partners had begun asking pointed questions about missing money in the weeks before June 7th. The Beach family's civil case, with a deposition just 3 days out, threatened to force his finances into public record. Paul was facing a felony trial that had already brought national scrutiny to the family. What the record does not show is any documented indication that Maggie herself recognized these pressures as a threat to her physical safety, or that she took protective steps in response to them. There's no restraining order, no reported call for help, no witness account of her expressing fear of Alex specifically. What witnesses and family friends described, both before and during the trial, was a woman managing a difficult marriage and a son's mounting legal troubles, not one who believed she was in danger. I'll say this plainly, because it matters. The warning signs that existed in this case were financial and behavioral red flags surrounding Alex, mounting debt exposure, a hidden addiction, a pattern of lying to cover both, not signs that Maggie could reasonably have read as a threat to her life. If you were looking for a lesson here, it isn't "she should have seen it coming." It's that financial desperation, when it's been successfully hidden for a decade, often stays invisible to the people closest to the person hiding it, right up until it isn't. In October 2023, Alex's defense team filed a motion for a new trial, alleging that Becky Hill, the clerk of court responsible for managing the jury during the 6-week trial, had improperly influenced jurors. In January 2024, retired Chief Justice Jean Toal held a hearing and took sworn testimony from all 12 jurors and from Hill herself. Jurors described specific comments. One juror, referred to in court filings as Juror Z, said Hill repeatedly urged the panel to watch him closely while Alex was on the stand, a comment that jurors said made it feel as though he was already guilty. That same juror said Hill discouraged the panel from trusting the defense's evidence and pushed for a fast verdict once deliberations began. A second, alternate juror independently described a similar warning from Hill about not letting the defense confuse or sway them. Hill denied under oath that she had made those specific statements, though she acknowledged she had used what she called poetic license, describing events in a book she later co-authored about the trial. A book that earned her roughly $100,000 in sales while she still held her elected office, and which was found to contain plagiarized passages from a journalist's reporting. In January 2024, Judge Toal ruled against Alex, finding that, while some of Hill's comments may have occurred, the defense hadn't proven they influenced the verdict, calling them fleeting and foolish rather than case-altering. Hill resigned from her elected position in March 2024, saying the decision was unrelated to the allegations against her. In December 2025, she pleaded guilty to 4 charges: obstruction of justice and perjury, for showing a reporter sealed court exhibit photographs and lying about it, plus 2 counts of misconduct in office tied to the bonuses and book promotion she conducted through her public role. Alex's team appealed Toal's ruling to the South Carolina Supreme Court, and on May 13, 2026, the court ruled unanimously 5-0 in Alex's favor. The justices wrote that Hill's conduct amounted to, quote, shocking jury interference that cost Alex his constitutional right to a fair trial by an impartial jury. Their written opinion went further, describing what she'd done as an unprecedented effort to influence the jury's thinking, language South Carolina courts had never applied to a clerk of court before. Importantly, the Supreme Court did not decide whether Alex committed the killings. Its ruling addressed one narrow legal question: whether Hill's conduct compromised the constitutional guarantee of an impartial jury. The justices found that it had, vacated both life sentences, and ordered a new trial, leaving the underlying question of guilt for a new jury to answer. Where the case stands right now. Here is the current, verified status of this case as of this video. Alex remains in prison. The murder convictions are vacated, but his guilty pleas to the state and federal financial crimes stand untouched, meaning he continues serving his 27-year state sentence and 40-year federal sentence, run concurrently, regardless of what happens with the murder retrial. On June 29, 2026, Alex appeared in a Lexington County courtroom for the first time since the reversal, for a motion hearing before newly assigned Circuit Judge Debra McCaslin. She set a tentative retrial date of April 5, 2027, while cautioning that the date could shift depending on how long new forensic testing takes. That forensic testing is significant. The defense is seeking independent retesting of DNA recovered from underneath Maggie's fingernails, DNA that the state's own forensic lab, SLED, had determined belonged to an unidentified male. That retesting alone could take 6 months or longer. Prosecutors, meanwhile, are seeking to make public records from the first trial, records not previously released. And because the evidentiary limits from the first trial no longer bind this proceeding, prosecutors have indicated Alex's financial crimes will not be restricted from presentation at the retrial the way portions of them were the first time. South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson has stated the state intends to retry the case aggressively and as soon as possible. Alex's attorneys, for their part, say he maintains, as he always has, that he did not kill his wife and son, and that they welcome a trial conducted properly under the Constitution this time. So here is where this leaves us. As of today, a jury heard 6 weeks of evidence and returned a unanimous guilty verdict in under 3 hours. That verdict has since been thrown out, not because a higher court found the evidence insufficient, but because of the conduct of one court official who was never herself charged with jury tampering, only with the process crimes surrounding her book and her access to sealed materials. Under South Carolina law and under the presumption of innocence that governs every American courtroom, Alex Murdaugh's guilt on the murder charges is, right now, legally unresolved, pending a trial currently scheduled for April of next year. So I'll leave you with the same question the state of South Carolina now has to answer all over again. If you were sitting on that jury in April of 2027, knowing everything I've just laid out for you, the financial motive, the phone video, the roadside shooting, and now the DNA that's never been explained, what verdict would you reach? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want the next case broken down with this same level of documentation, no speculation, no filler, just what the record actually says, subscribe to 404 Dark Mysteries, and I'll see you in the next one.